Ashton Jeanty, our first player up here, Boone. As I mentioned, I want to get this off my chest here first before we talk about Ashton Jeanty. And I've been down on the Jeanty. I was down on him as a season-long pick, kind of relative. I thought he was more of a second rounder than a first rounder, whatever. I didn't think he was going to be terrible this season. I wanted to put him in the coping corner at the end of the season, mostly because he had been disappointing relative to expectations and then faced these really tough matchups. Well, again, he threw it back in my face by eliminating one of my teams. But I want that to serve as a reminder to people, Boone. I don't want to hear ever again, this guy ruined my season. No. One pick does not ruin your season. Stop being a baby, get off your butt, and compete, okay? Put together a good team. Sigmund Bloom put together a really good team in that Apex League, despite the fact that he selected Ashton Jeanty. And you know what? He's going to eliminate me tonight when CMC – and look, obviously it's a little bit of a bizarre league that's very PPR heavy, wide receiver heavy. He zigged when everybody zags, and he went CMC and Ashton Jeanty in his first two picks. So maybe a little bit not a perfectly analogous situation. But nevertheless, I don't want to hear it. One player doesn't ruin your season. Compete, put together a good team, and knock off some dork like me. It can be done, okay?
Yeah, well said by you. And the Jeanty one is so weird. Like, I had him ranked low. Bizarre. I had him ranked outside of my top 24 running backs last week, to admit my fault there. And yet now, I think it's full trust. And you look at this, it makes no sense. Like the performance last week makes no sense, but we do have some reason after that performance and looking at the matchup next week why I think we can have full trust. But first, let's recap a little bit, right? Like, the dude was under 50 scrimmage yards in his previous two games before this performance. The Raiders were projected for like around 12 points last week. I think it might have got as low as like 11.5. They were going against the best defense in the league in the Texans. And that's the game where he goes off for 188 yards and 2 TDs. Like, just so frustrating, so hard to predict this. Hats off to him. He is a talent. Yeah. It's great that he came through in this spot. I doubt many people other than Sig were in that position to be able to start him in the fantasy semifinals. It seems like he's one of those players that's probably helping people win their consolation leagues, depending whether you're trying to win the consolation league or whether it's the lowest score that moves on there. But here's the thing. This week, he gets the Giants now. And the weirdest part of all this is the Raiders, after the season that they've had, they're actually projected to win this game right now. And shout out to our buddy Joel Smith. He's doing great work. I've loved a lot of the stuff that he's put out for Yahoo this year. But he had a fantastic stat that in the 6 games where the Raiders have either lost by 3 or less or won, Jeanty's averaging 21.5 fantasy points per game. In the other games, 10.5 fantasy points per game. So more than double the points when the game is close or when they win. And I think this is a spot where that is going to be how it plays out. And that means, I'm all in on Jeanty this week as a high-end RB2, maybe even as that borderline low-end RB1. And just because the way things have gone this year, he'll go right back to putting up like 30 yards this week, I'm sure, after he went off against the Texans.
What a pitiful season for the Raiders, that usually when people have those stats, it's, in wins, Jonathan Taylor averages this many fantasy points. In losses, he averages this many fantasy points. For the Raiders, it's, well, when they only lose by like 3 points, then Ashton Jeanty, I mean, they still lose, but only when they lose by like a little bit. When they lose by a lot, that's when he's no good in fantasy. So that's just a very kind of funny twist on this Raiders season. But yeah, look, it's also a battle for the number 1 overall pick. Neither one of these teams will have any interest in getting that number 1 overall pick, but this game is going to go a long way in deciding who picks first in the draft. So that is a reason to watch this game beyond the fact that we've got some players like Ashton Jeanty in the mix here. But yeah, right now it's the Giants' pick to lose here. I'll tell you what, Joe Shane, he don't want to be picking first in the draft. And I don't know, maybe he does. Maybe he buys into these theories that they should just bail on Jackson Dart and get Fernando Mendoza. Maybe he does want to pick, but ideally the coaching staff certainly doesn't. The Raiders definitely don't want to be picking first in the draft. Pete Carroll wants to compete. He wants to have a win here to end the season. So yeah, full trust for me for Ashton Jeanty. So famous last words. Okay. Kenneth Walker, next player up here. Boone, you and I were texting.
Can we pass on this one? Do we have to talk about this?
No.
I've never used a pass on one of these shows. Can we just pass?
No, we have to talk about this. We have to talk about Kenneth Walker. You and I were texting about Kenneth Walker on Thursday night after a lively discussion as the game was going to happen a few hours later on our preview show. He ran the ball 11 times for 100 yards. He caught the ball 3 times for 64 yards. He scored a touchdown. December to remember. See, I said it was going to happen. I mean, ignore all those other games in December, but this one game in December, Justin Boone will certainly always remember what happened in Week 16 of the 2025 NFL season. So with all that, with that preamble, what's your level of trust on Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of players that I had in lineups who were great players, elite talents who didn't come through. This is one that was on all of my benches, and he finally comes through, and it makes no sense, Harmon. It's kind of like the Jeanty thing, right? He's been a letdown most of the year, was held under 5 fantasy points in Week 14, under 5 fantasy points in Week 15, the 2 weeks leading up to this. He's going against the defense that's allowing the fewest fantasy points to running backs in Week 16. And he comes through with this monster day, 164 yards and a touchdown. And now, even funnier, his 2 best games on the season have been against this Rams defense that is so good against everybody else on the ground. And yet somehow he breaks these big plays and he gets it done here. And it's no trust. I can't go you're cooked, bro, because he's shown in this game he can go off at any moment, and we always have known that that's the case. But we had the run up here where he had those down weeks, under 5 fantasy points in 2 straight games, and then goes off here. And I don't know what else to say. We've talked about this guy maybe more than anyone all season long. I still have no trust in him. This was a great performance, but he has not strung together multiple great performances very often this season. So I don't know how you could feel good about putting him in your lineup. I think you have to do it just at your own risk now. You got to make that decision based on who else you have. And I don't even know where my bias is going to lead me now. I'm so bitter. The teams that are getting through with Kenneth Walker, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to bring myself to put him into lineups this week, but he'll be in the same kind of range that he's been for a while, where he's like that high-end RB3. Zach Charbonnet also in the RB3 flex range, and we just see whether Walker can find the end zone on a big play, whether he can break a long run or a long catch, and whether Charbonnet gets the goal line work. And yeah, both these guys ended up coming through in this game, even though I'm not sure many managers had the guts to actually put them in their lineups in the semifinals, because I sure didn't.
Oh, man. Okay, 2 things. One, there's really something to be said for if you just listen to this show, you really should watch on YouTube just to see how defeated and exasperated Justin Boone is right now while wearing the Santa hat. There's just a real twist of irony there on that one. The other thing, man, I can't believe you're going no trust here. I think I might have some trust on Kenny Walker here in this game. It's a Panthers defense that's 24th before this week, they were 24th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, scoring to 4 for 4. They gave up some good rushing production to Bucky Irving. We'll get to Bucky Irving later on and some of the reasons why my Bucky Irving team, I don't know how I feel about him this upcoming week. We'll get to that for other reasons, but they gave up some good rushing lanes to him. And this was the best performance of the Seahawks season from an EPA per rush perspective on their running back runs. Clearly the best performance of the season. One of their 6 games with over 40% rushing success rate. So I'm not going to say that they've figured out their run game by any means, but I don't know. I might have some trust in Kenneth Walker in Week 17.
I think it's got to be a little more matchup specific with the Rams. I think they have something on the Rams that's working, because we saw a lot of other teams have struggled, and yet they were able to have success in these 2 matchups with the Rams. And if you want to talk to me about plus matchups, I just don't think we can play that game with Walker, because one of those 2 games where he was held to under 5 fantasy points, it was a plus matchup against the Falcons. You would have thought in that game that maybe he would have got it going. So he has failed in good spots this year. He's now come through in bad spots multiple times. He is very difficult to trust, and that's why for me it's still I'm holding strong at no trust, but perhaps I am just a little bit bitter about this one because I feel pretty snake bitten by him all season long.
I think that's fair about the Rams point, because the way that defense is, they're very aggressive up front. And I think part of what that might be is because they are coming after Sam Darnold with some of those blitzes, that if you're able to just slip Kenneth Walker behind them, that might actually be there might actually be something there.
Yeah.
I think I could buy that part of it. But like from an overall success rate standpoint, they actually didn't have that great of a game against the Rams in the first. That's actually one of their worst success rate games from a running back runs perspective. So I don't know, but from a big play perspective, that might be what it is there. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm going too far in some trust, but we're generally saying like it could go either way here for Kenneth Walker, and you got to be pretty bold to try to run it back.
Next year, I'm going to negotiate into my contract passes, where if you bring up certain players on this show, I just get to pass on them. We don't have to talk about it, and we just move forward. We need that. We need that option. I can't talk about Kenneth Walker anymore.
Well, I mean, I'm okay with it. I have literally no say in anybody's contracts or incentives or anything like that. But you know what? Tell the bosses I'm willing to greenlight that. It's good for the show. Okay, next one here. Probably another situation you don't want to talk about. Your boy TreVeyon Henderson leaves week 16 early with a concussion, and yet we get Rhamondre Stevenson in here having a pretty nice game. Runs in a touchdown, was efficient on his carries. Where are we at with Rhamondre Stevenson for the trust meter in week 17?
Well, this will depend on TreVeyon Henderson, but I mean, in concussion protocol, normally guys miss a week when that's the case. So I don't know that we're going to see Henderson in the fantasy championship, and that means I'm full trust here on Rhamondre Stevenson, Harmon. Like we saw, he's had moments this year where he's put up decent fantasy stats, and now it looks like he's going to be the dude in this backfield against the Jets defense that we've talked about. Gives up the second most fantasy points to running backs. And I know last week that banged up Saints backfield, they held them in check. That's fine. But we can still go back to the stat that I was preaching last week. The Jets defense has allowed 14 touchdowns to running backs over now their last 6 games. That is still incredible. That is still impressive. And that's still something that we're going to want to target for fantasy. So assuming that Henderson is out, it is full trust on Stevenson as an RB2 and a guy that I could see being one of these heroes in the fantasy championships.
We probably actually did not give this enough credit. You mentioned that's banged up Saints backfield. Chris and I probably didn't talk about this enough when we just emailed through this game, and mostly we talked about Chris Olave and just like, hey, AD Mitchell was able to get some targets, whatever. But yes, there was no running back that went off against the New York Jets for the Saints. However, Taysom Hill kind of had a moment. he had the long touchdown throw to Chris Olave. He had some receptions as well. He was in the backfield, though, on 22% of his snaps, and he had 12 carries for 42 yards. And there were a couple watching that game, like true running back runs, outside zone stuff. So I actually think Taysom Hill having 12 carries for over 40 yards against the Jets, it speaks to that is still a very gettable matchup against that Jets defense. So yeah, Rhamondre Stevenson could be one of those guys that he could go from, man, you hate to you hated him all season long because of the TreVeyon Henderson stuff, to he might be like the hero of week 17. It's a good offense. It's a great matchup against this Jets defense. I'm with you. I have full trust in Stevenson here.
Yeah, I think Stevenson could be one of those guys, and we'll talk about him a little more later, but Taysom Hill could definitely be one of those guys. And it's so funny that it's always this time of year we see guys pop up that haven't done much all season long, and yet they come through when things matter most. And for Taysom Hill, like, he's only topped 3 fantasy points once this season before this game, and then he completely goes off. And now what's stopping him from having another big week here? There's no one coming to save that backfield. Audric Estime played 58% of the snaps. He led the running backs in snap share. And yet, yeah, it looks like Taysom Hill is going to have a huge role here. So you look to him as somebody you think about putting in your lineup this week, and you definitely think about putting Rhamondre Stevenson in your lineup, even though he's probably also been on your bench for most of the season.
Yeah, I think Stevenson is a good back. I think he's gotten unfairly maligned with Travion Henderson fantasy chatter this year. You mentioned Taysom Hill. He's playing the Titans this week. We're going to finish off this running back section with a Tennessee Titans player, Tyjae Spears. Level of trust in Tyjae Spears, who scored a touchdown this past week. It's also worth noting that Tony Pollard is third in the NFL in rushing yards since week 12. So talk about a guy like that. Actually might be okay. I don't know how many Tony Pollard teams are available in the playoffs. Like at this point, I'm being a little facetious because you could definitely draft around a bad, like you could draft around a bad Tony Pollard draft pick. You could manage around that. But yeah, Tony Pollard doing it when it certainly is way too late here. Where are we at with, we can just group in Titans running backs here. Tyjae Spears, Tony Pollard, any trust on these guys?
I still feel like it's no trust, maybe a little more in Tony Pollard. I mean, for Spears, he's only topped 7 fantasy points in half PPR twice this season. So yeah, like it was a good game for him. I know, like I mentioned earlier, he was the hero of last year's playoffs, a little bit different scenario where he kind of became the guy down the stretch. This season, that's not the case. Tony Pollard's still getting a lot of work, like you said, but I can't start Spears as anything more than like a risky RB3 flex option. So no trust for me on him. And Pollard, any given week, this is a backfield where, we have 2 running backs sharing the load, where there's going to be weeks where this offense just completely falls apart. For Spears, he's the second back in that backfield. I don't have a lot of trust in these Titans backs. I think if you're in the fantasy championship, it's just too thin of a play. You got to aim higher.